Hello and welcome to Dragon Bites, the paediatric podcast aimed at paediatric trainees or anyone interested in child health. I'm Asim, one of the paediatric trainees here in Wales and one of the presenters for Dragon Bites. We've got an extra special episode for you this week. We were lucky enough a few weeks ago to be joined by the new president of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, Camilla Kingdon. She took some time out of her really busy schedule to speak to two of our Dragon Bites presenters, Stacey Harris and Hannah Davies, about a whole range of issues that affect paediatric trainees. So we're going to play you the first half of the interview this week, and then we'll have the second half out for you next week. That's enough from me. Let's get started.
So hi everybody, and welcome to this episode of Dragon Bites. So I'm delighted to be joined by the President of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, Camilla Kingdon. I'm a little bit starstruck and thank you so much for offering your time to speak to us, and we really appreciate it. And joining me today as well to chat to Camilla is Hannah Davies, who is the newly elected Wales trainee rep. So also a little bit starstruck, although I know Hannah quite well. We've trained together for a long time. So yeah, thank you. So Hannah's told me that she's done a little bit of research about you, Camilla.
Oh.
I'll hand over to her to introduce you a little bit more, if that's okay.
So just a little bit of So I was having a look back. So born in South Africa, trained as a paediatrician in London, a very successful consultant neonatologist since 2000, with special interests in neonatal nutrition, donor milk banks, which I know Stacey will be very interested in. Lots of work with medical education, undergraduate and postgraduates, head of London School of Paediatrics and Child Health for 5 years, medical careers support, medical careers management masters in Brighton 2013. You have been a very, very busy add a cherry to that cake now. You're president of the I mean, wow.
Well, first of all, it's fantastic to be here this afternoon, and I actually feel very lucky, and actually with my careers hat on, I think luck actually plays a hugely important role in so many of our careers, and I so genuinely when I hear you describe my career like that, I do think, wow, God, did I really do all of that? Haven't I been lucky? Because I think finding opportunities as they come along and being in the position to be able to say, yes, why don't I have a go at that? Or shall I try this? Makes for an incredibly rich career. And I do feel I've been very blessed by having a very varied and interesting career. But I think the thing that I've learned, and also from my reading, is that one has to develop the mindset. And I think, writers and clever psychologists would call it a growth mindset. It's this idea that you are psychologically positioned to grab opportunities and not worry too much about whether you're going to be successful or not. Because often it's the journey that one takes along the road where you learn the most, rather than whether ultimately you are successful or not. And that's kind of always been my mantra, that kind of nothing ventured, nothing gained kind of idea. You don't know until you've tried. And it may be a flop, but it could be a great success. And so I started my consultant career. I went to part-time when I became a consultant, because that's when my first child was born. And so I've always had a part-time consultant contract. And actually, I think that gave me the opportunity to pick up these extra little jobs and roles and responsibilities. Whereas if I'd been full-time, I'm not sure I would have. So I think actually that's the secret weapon that I mean, I was going to say women have, but of course that's not the case, because there are now plenty of men who train part-time and work part-time. But I do think that's the secret kind of win that you get out of working part-time, because that was how I took on various roles and responsibilities, ended up doing this fantastic master's in medical careers, which just opened my mind to thinking very differently about careers, about what we mean by success, about the role of luck or planned happenstance, which is the kind of probably the more technically correct term. It's just been, I've just been so fortunate to have all those opportunities, and I've been able to meet lots of interesting people and do some really fabulously interesting jobs. So yeah, I feel very blessed.
Yeah, amazing. And just hearing that makes me feel so inspired, because now I've just gone part-time. I'm like, oh, I'm excited about my little journey ahead. And
Yes,
just as well,
yes.
like the amount of proportion of our members who are going less than full-time, and paediatrics being at the forefront of offering less than full-time positions. I mean, it's just exciting to see what comes out of that, isn't it?
I think there's huge opportunity, and I think actually it's going to become a strong selling point for our specialty, because I think we would recognise that paediatrics is a tough clinical, front-facing clinical specialty, and for some people that's a bit off-putting. But I think the fact that we've so openly embraced flexible working, um, actually, as we move forward, is going to be increasingly attractive to people, because my perception is that generationally people's priorities are changing, and the sort of idea of work-life balance, which people used to slightly sort of sniff and then talk about, kind of work-life balance kind of thing, as if it was a bit of a kind of soft touch, actually is now a core value for so many people. And so often working part time, even if you just drop to 80%, just having that 20% of time in the week to go off and do other things can genuinely be the recipe for success, prevent burnout, just keep that bit of balance going. And so I think the fact that we've trailblazed and shown that you can make it work, that rotas can work very, very successfully, people can train very successfully part time, I think is going to be, to our advantage long term.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with all of the things that you said, because I also have been less than full time for a few years now since my children were born. And yeah, the difference in me as a person and a paediatrician is quite staggering, really. It just gives you that space to kind of consider and think about the bigger picture. And I think, it's just really empowering. And I think, yeah, it's kind of I agree, the secret to success and a happy, thriving person.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. I've seen Stacey develop. I met her when I was a little baby, actually, because I was an ST1 in neonates, and she came back, and I've just seen her grown, and she has literally gone from strength to strength, and it's so nice to see somebody. No, you are, Stacey, honestly, and like her
We'll
well-being
cut this
work,
out of the podcast.
her well-being work as well. Like literally as a junior, looking up to somebody, like she's been amazing. So yeah, doesn't
Fantastic.
Little love club here.
Brilliant role model.
Wow.
So we might as well talk about well-being now, because it kind of moves on from that, doesn't it? So we've talked a little bit about work-life balance and what a key part being less than full-time can play in that. And I think Hannah had a question for you based around your, how you maintain your well-being.
Yeah, so obviously you're a very busy professional woman, and I know you've got an interest in combating burnout and disillusionment with medicine. So I was just interested in what techniques you use personally, and if there's any techniques you'd recommend to the members.
So I think this is actually a really genuinely really important question, because if you think about it, most of your generation are going to work until your late 60s. And so it really is about playing the long game, and setting in place habits and patterns of working that mean that you can see out a career over a very long time. My observation, and there's a little bit of literature to bear witness to this, is that if you can explicitly embark on what the correct term is portfolio career, I think you're much more likely to successfully thrive in a medical career all the way through to retirement. So what I mean by that, and it's going to be different for everybody, is that all of us have come into pediatrics to do the clinical medicine, work with children, work with families, and that's our kind of core business. But I think that each of us needs something else professionally, so that we're not doing frontline clinical pediatrics 100% of our working lives, because it's simply too punishing. And I think that's increasingly so as medicine becomes more complex, as our relationships with families becomes more complicated. Society's demands on the medical profession are changing. The whole landscape is different. So to sustain that at 100% from the age of 25 when you graduate to, let's say, 67, I think there are very few people who can do that successfully. And so my sense is that you have to think about some other strand to your bow, something else in your career. So for me, it's been around medical education and medical careers. For other people, it might be around an interest in global child health, and an ongoing interest in the kind of international child health world. Other people will get into medical leadership. That there are actually now so many other things you could be doing that allow you then to balance the clinical with something else. And I genuinely do think that's the secret. That's not to say you're not going to work really, really hard, but there's something about having a couple of different things on the go that's quite invigorating and kind of rejuvenating. I certainly find, you do 2 or 3 days of full-on clinical work, and it's exhausting, and you get to the end and you kind of feel really chuffed, but ready to then move on to do something else. And so I find, my weeks, I do clinical work as a neonatologist. We do weeks on and weeks off, but I tend to do clinical work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I have a clinic on a Thursday morning. The rest of Thursday and Friday are always something else. And then there's some weeks when I don't do any clinical work. And that balance and the variety is actually, I think, quite therapeutic. And it's not that one isn't rushing around and very, very busy, but you're using different bits of your brain, you're using different skills, you're dealing with different groups of people. And I think that's fantastic. And we're so fortunate in medicine that we actually genuinely can do this. I think there are a lot of professions where you either do the job or you don't do the job. But for us, you can pick up these other roles and responsibilities. So I think in a professional sense, that's the secret. And then I think in terms of work-life balance, for each of us, we're going to have to, you have to think about how what makes you tick. And so I think having some self-awareness is absolutely key, knowing how hard you can push yourself and being conscious that there's a line that you can't move over. Knowing, for instance, how much sleep you need. There's no point pretending about these things. And each of us is different. There apparently are people who can survive on 4 hours sleep a night, but actually that isn't true of most of us. Most of us need 6-7 hours of sleep. And if you've got a young family, that can be a real challenge. I can see Stacey sort of rolling her eyes. But
I need much more than to that.
Yes,
I think I need 9
you probably
hours
don't
sleep.
get anywhere near it.
Get 9 hours sleep.
No. So
Lions
I think
thing of
having
the
that
past.
self-awareness. Sorry.
I said lions are a thing of the past.
Oh yes.
Don't know what they are.
Oh yes. No. Although I have to say, when my children, I can't get them out of bed. I mean, 1 o'clock, and I'm feeling chuffed if I'm seeing them when they're at home. I dare not phone them at university before 1 o'clock because you'll get such a kind of bad mood on the response. But so I think, yes, so understand, so I really enjoy running, and so I'll go for a run. I'm really into listening to podcasts at the moment. A, it makes me run further, but B, it kind of really switches me off. So I've been listening to, I don't know, I'm sure you know, well, of course. But I mean, Brené Brown's got the most fantastic series, Dare to Lead, and she's got another series at the moment. And every week she's putting on new episodes. So that's my favorite thing on a Sunday is a Brené Brown podcast while I run. It's kind of treat. Each of us, it's different. And of course, at different stages of your life, one can do some things more or less than others, depending on families and so on. So I think explicitly thinking about this is actually really important. And I'm surprised how many people sort of bumble through life not really thinking too hard about this, whereas I think it's fundamental to thriving. you don't want to just sort of grit your teeth and survive. It's got to be
No.
about thriving.
Yeah.
And I'm taken aback how, I keep meeting people who haven't actually given it enough attention, and I think that's a mistake.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just, it's so wonderful to hear you just saying all of the things that I've been thinking over the last few years. Yes, exactly. So yeah, I can't agree more, really. So I suppose this ties in with how can we make pediatric training allow and be flexible to be able to do, like, you say, a portfolio career. How can we get that into our training more?
So I think this has been, David Evans, and who sadly is just finishing his 5 years as vice president, although he's going to be Catherine Chadwick will be taking over and will be fantastic. But David and I have talked a lot about this over the years. This for us as pediatricians, the idea of creating flexible career pathways seems just so self-evident and so obviously what we need to do. But we do work within the constraints of Health Education England's training pathways, and I don't want to sit here and criticise HEE. They've got an incredibly difficult task. They're responsible for all of medical training plus the other healthcare professionals training as well. But I think we do need to increasingly just keep talking about the importance of flexibility. So for some people, that will be about training part-time. That will give them enough opportunities within their lives to do other things and to thrive. For other people, it's going to be about stepping out of training for a period of time and going off and just doing something else. So it's about enabling people to do that as well. And I really hope that our what we call Progress Plus, which is going to be the new way in which we are going to be training. We're waiting for the GMC to sign off our plan, which will change pediatrics into a 7-year training program that consists of 4 years of core pediatrics, followed by 3 years of specialty pediatrics, which will consist of our 17 grid specialties, and then our biggest specialty, which is general pediatrics. We have written into our plan various points when it would be a natural place to go out of program. So it might be that you go out of program to do research, but actually you might just simply want to pause your training and just go off and do a local, a trust grade post in a specialty area that particularly interests you, for instance. Or it might be that I've met many trainees who are at a phase in their lives when they've got 2 or 3 small children at home. They may have a partner who's got a really busy career. They simply want an 8 till 4, Monday to Friday type job. And, the reality is most training posts just don't offer that. And it's broken my heart over the years to see trainees have to resign to go and do that kind of work, when in fact they're fantastic pediatricians. And a few years down the line, when their children are a little bit older, they're almost certainly going to be ready to want to come back into training. And under the previous, under our current way of working, they would have to resign and then reapply. So hopefully, this idea of out of program pause would facilitate that kind of career choice as well. So I think the more we can sort of have a suite of options that allow people to think creatively about their training, the better. I mean, we've got a curriculum, so this is not about compromising or downgrading our training or anything like that. We've got a curriculum. Everyone has to cover the curriculum, but quite how they do it, I'm really hopeful that we will be able to introduce much more flexibility, and therefore increasing that we don't lose great trainees, which sadly we have done over the years because it's just been too difficult to stay in a rigid training program.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers that question.
trainees. Yeah, I've known some brilliant trainees who we've lost to general practice, and I know that they'll still probably contribute amazingly to child health and general practice. But like you said, it's just sad to see those colleagues lost just because of the work-life balance element of the job at the moment. So that's exciting times ahead.
well, we've got to make it work, and I think that's going to be key. And we need people to role model. It'll be interesting to learn and see trainees try out, different ideas, and there'll be some bumps along the way. I mean, these changes are never easy, and particularly when we'll be having to try and sort of persuade HEE to be brave about this. But I do think it's the future of our profession. I know that sounds a bit dramatic, but actually, if we can't get this right, I think people will pick other. There's so many amazing careers out there now. I think we'll lose brilliant people if we can't move with the times and be, a bit more kind of open-minded and flexible in our approaches.
And I think that's brilliant because you've obviously done a lot of work as well with recruitment, etc. And amazing news that the RCPCH membership, despite COVID last year, went up by something like 2 to 3%, which is amazing. And obviously, I wanted to get it in the podcast as well for our medical student listeners that the college is now free for medical students within the UK, which is an amazing thing. So hopefully that, we can get as many people interested in paediatrics involved with the RCPCH as possible. But I was also just wondering, with recruitment things and the problems that we have in our remote and rural communities, I was just wondering if there's any advice from yourself or the college that you can think to help with promoting recruitment in these remote and rural areas.
So I think remote and rural healthcare is a real challenge. I mean, to be honest, it's a challenge around the globe, isn't it? But if we're thinking about the UK, it certainly is, and we know that recruitment is incredibly difficult, and we also know that where there are rota gaps, patient safety can be compromised. So actually, this is a really serious issue. So we do need to think creatively and work hard to try and address it. I think it's about thinking about the wider workforce, so not being too sort of uni-professional in our approach. Um, if we look at remote and rural areas, you will often find that they are people who are thrilled to live in that area, but they are perhaps not young doctors. There may be a group of people, particularly thinking about advanced clinical practice in terms of nurses, where they're living in the area, they're a stable population, but where actually if we develop their skills, particularly with some of these kind of advanced clinical practice skills, one could be making very important additions to the healthcare workforce in some of these areas. So I'm not saying that's the whole solution, but I do think we need to think beyond medicine to how we can support and help these parts of the country. I also think more long term, we have a bit of a problem in as much as the sorts of people we generally recruit into medicine tend to come from the big cities, or they come to medical school in a big city. They get kind of,
Urbanized
by living there and organized. And then, of course, the thought of them being able to get them to move back perhaps to a remote area is really challenging. So if we thought differently about how we recruited people, if we brought, and this is really where widening participation is so important. I mean, it's one of the many reasons why widening participation is so important. I think we need to be thinking differently about the kinds of people we recruit into medicine, so that we go out of our ways to tap into groups who currently they wouldn't be considering medicine, and we wouldn't be particularly trying very hard to entice them into medicine. Because I think if we don't start thinking differently about who comes into healthcare, we aren't going to be able to solve these problems. So I think it needs a really radical think, but I don't think there are any quick early solution fixes, as it were. But it's a really important one, because if you think about some of our hospitals that are struggling, they hit the headlines with, a sudden surge in perinatal deaths, for instance. And then you look at the map, you often realize that they're in very remote parts of the country, and they have almost certainly perennially struggled to recruit, and will have unfilled consultant posts, rota gaps on their junior rotas, shortages of children trained nurses, etc. So it's a significant problem, and we're going to have to kind of start thinking really creatively about it.
Yeah, because that creates extra burnout then for other staff already
Oh
in
yeah,
those.
awful. awful.
exacerbates the issue, doesn't it?
So yeah, it really ties into that whole bigger picture thing that how it's not just, we're all interconnected. So, you know, even things like transport links, things like that. And
Yes.
I suppose it really resonated with me as someone who came from a high school, from the first person in my family to go to university. And yeah, I'm very much in the minority of medics, and coming from actually a very rural place, and then I've come back to my hometown, really. So yeah, that resonated with me of you know, of really trying to include those people, and thinking about medicine a bit more broadly, because, you know, of course we have to be intelligent and you know, and be able to do the work. But the more and more I realised that being a doctor is very much about being a good human being and having that human interaction, as well as having, you know, and having those, you know, having exams and grades as the thing that kind of stops you or enables you to go to university. You know, we need to have some sort of selection, but perhaps it can be different. Just thinking about it differently. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And I think the more I go through medicine and the more I come into contact with families, is actually just being a good listener. You actually get 100%, not most of the time anyway, I find my diagnosis just from listening to the families. So communication skills are really key. And I think you're right, Stacey, just selecting people off, you know, how many A stars they've had, etc. Yes, that's an amazing accomplishment, but you have to be an all-rounder, and having those amazing communication skills are just as important as the educational side of it.
Yeah. Cool. We're like having the meaning of life conversation.
Yes.
Oh, this is getting really deep.
And that was the first half of our interview with Camilla Kingdon. I just wanted to say thank you to her for taking so much time out of her busy schedule to speak with us. Join us again next week for the continuation of this interview with Camilla, Stacey and Hannah. That's all for this week. Thank you for listening to Dragon Bites.